Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to go through my favorite books that I have picked up over this last quarter, which would be July through September, and specifically the ones that are not new fantasy. A lot of you know I really prioritize new fantasy releases, and thus I pick up a lot of new fantasy, and so every now and then I branch out and I pick things up from other genres, or I pick up backlist fantasy. And the list of books today, unfortunately, I usually like to have a top 5 from the last quarter, and I guess technically there's 5 here because one of them is a trilogy, but I feel like that doesn't really count. But I just didn't find a lot of the things I read to stand out much, and to be fair, I also didn't read as much non-new fantasy this last quarter, so that's part of it. But I'm gonna go through the ones that were my favorites, and then I'll list a couple of other ones that I picked up just to give you some thoughts, kind of treat this like a best of and a mini wrap up. So I'll start with Murderbot. I still need to continue on with Murderbot, but from the little that I have picked up thus far, I greatly enjoyed it. I know so many of you are already well aware what Murderbot is about, but it follows this, you could say basically this murder machine known as Murderbot, who just wants to watch its shows. That's all it wants. It just wants to be left alone so it can watch basically reality TV. And because it is a murder bot, it is supposed to accompany humans and protect them as they go on these quests, we'll say. And the plot really isn't, it's kind of whatever. The plot is not the thing that gripped me or anything like that. It was just the connection to Murderbot. I think that very relatable. Is it really awful to say mediocrity? That it's almost like you see so often in stories, characters that are doing these amazing things. They become the strongest warrior or the best magic user, or they might not be either of those things, but they are an important part of a cast of characters that are all taking part in saving the world or something like that. And to read about a character that just wants to chill, basically, was kind of endearing. Plus, it has this sense of almost like social anxiety, which is, I feel awful being like, it was so cute, because it's a lot of us suffer from social anxiety, and to a point where it can be very difficult for a lot of people. So I don't mean like, oh, it's so cute in the demeaning way. I more mean that it's just really nice to see a character, especially one like Murderbot, who has the ability to be this murder machine. It has these capabilities, and yet it just wants the simplicity of life. And I really enjoyed that about it. I hear that as you read more Murderbot, it continues to get better and better. So I have really high hopes, and I plan to continue. If I can, I'm going to try to read as many as I can before, I believe there's another one that's coming out in November. I would love to get caught up. Don't know if that's going to happen because I have a lot of other things I need to pick up, but I would very much like that to happen because I quite enjoyed Murderbot. Next, we have the Shades of Magic trilogy. So I reread these as part of my, what I'm calling my Shade Along, where myself and several of my friends here on BookTube, we reread the original trilogy, except for my friend Tori, who it was her first time reading it. She'd read her other V. Schwab works, just never Shades. So it was kind of fun to have a first-time Shades reader. I know this series is rather polarizing, feels almost too dramatic of a word, but I know some of the characters and the amount of magic and the amount of ambiguity with how certain things work and the worlds and things like that. I know it can be very hit or miss for a lot of people, but rereading it, it was a big hit. Obviously, if it were a miss, it probably wouldn't be listed as my top of the last quarter. But I just had so much fun being back in this world. I like the balance of explanation versus mystery in the magic. I really feel like the way that she writes this style of fantasy, because she has a mix. Some of hers are more fantasy horror, some of hers are more sci-fi-esque, and this particular, like, this is just fantasy in a lot of ways. The way in which she writes it, it feels like you're glimpsing a piece of something that exists, this world that exists, this magic that exists, but that there's still so much shrouded in mystery. There's still so much the characters don't even know. It feels in a way as though you're actually seeing something real, because if you were to live in that world, you would only know that time and place. You wouldn't know the extensive history. You wouldn't have all the mysteries solved. You wouldn't know every single thing about every single place. And I like that. I don't know. It feels oddly more realistic to me. And that's not to say things like Stormlight Archive that are extremely detailed, that I don't like that kind of world building, because in Stormlight it works for me, because then I'm like, I feel like I know this whole world and it feels like another planet. So I guess in a sense I like both. But Stormlight, it's just a different kind of world building, and I really enjoyed it. I like the pace of it. I enjoy the characters. I completely understand why people find Delilah Bard super frustrating, because she is. But I still really enjoy how distinct these characters are. And I like that V.E. Schwab went for it with them. Some of them are super rough around the edges. Some of them are flawed and a little bit self-centered. Some of them are kind of mopey and they don't really reflect sometimes. And I think in a way it's almost like they're realistically annoying, but they're not so annoying that they feel like caricatures. Maybe Delilah Bard, there's some argument that she does. But regardless, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm like, I know people don't like it, but I do. Which is kind of a silly way to present how much I like. I just like it. I like the magic. I like the worlds, kind of plural. I think the thing that really is why I enjoy it so much, though, is the exploration, of Holland's character. He's probably one of my favorite villains of any series, and in some ways reminds me of Scar from Full Metal Alchemist, because of how your perspective of him shifts once you have more information about him, and how he starts as just this kind of antagonistic character, and then they become somebody who's so interesting and you really kind of root for them, but at the same time it feels wrong to root for them, and other characters still continue to hate them. There's a part of you that's like, oh, but if only you knew. And I always like when any kind of storyteller can accomplish that in a story, which I feel V.E. Schwab did with Holland. So definitely had fun rereading that. I'm currently, at the time of filming this, reading Threads of Power, so I'm very excited to see what I think of that. After that, we have The Flatshare, which is a contemporary romance story, and you follow these individuals who are both living in the same place, but because of their work schedules, they do not actually ever cross paths. One of them works nights, so they're obviously at home during the day, and then the other works days and then is home at night. So they always miss each other. They've never met, but they leave notes to each other to let them know, like, oh, hey, I made this thing for dinner and I have lots of leftovers if you want some, and just stuff like that. And they get to know each other, and when the story first starts out, it's really not romantic between these two characters whatsoever. It's not like they're falling in love just based off of like, hey, I made cookies. But you're seeing the way that they kind of become friends to some degree with this person they've never really met. But more so, you're exploring them and the really large challenges that they're facing. You do go back and forth between a lady and a guy, and the lady is somebody who clearly you as the reader can see was in a manipulative relationship, potentially even abusive, but you don't know all the details, and she has been manipulated to a point where she doesn't even see it. And so it's almost like an unreliable narrator for a long time with her. And then the other character's brother has been wrongfully imprisoned, and he is trying everything in his power to get his brother out. He's also a palliative care nurse, and so he works with people who are sick or elderly. And that part of the story I really, really liked, and I just thought these characters had a lot of depth. And then as the story progressed, you see the way that their friendship kind of blossoms into something a little bit more. And I thought that the story was very cheeky, and the writing was quite funny at times. These characters were funny. They had very distinct voices. For example, the male perspective, because in the way he writes and everything, it's very clipped, then his perspectives are that way too, which might deter some people. They might not like that, but I thought it was a risk that paid off. It very much felt like their perspectives were very different from each other and represented their personalities really well. And I just liked the exploration of their characters quite a bit. And I thought the love story was cute in the end. So I quite liked those. Those would be my main top books for the quarter. A lot of the rest of what I picked up was just okay, or was a new fantasy, like I said. So I'll mention a couple other ones that I liked, but I didn't know that I felt I could put them quite on my favorites, but some of you might think that these sound fun, so I thought I would mention them. One of them, I did really like this. It was a newer release, It is sci-fi though, so I didn't really think I could put it in a new fantasy, and I didn't like it quite as much as the other ones I mentioned, and that would be On Earth as it is on television. So this is a story that feels very similar to White Noise, if you've picked that one up, by Don DeLillo, mixed with just first contact, aliens first coming to our planet. But what happens if the aliens don't actually really contact us? And they don't really land, they just, like, their ship just comes and then they leave? What would that do to society? And you go through all these different perspectives of people that feel very unrelated, and you're just kind of following them and wherever they live. And so some of them are pretty annoying, some of them are fine, mundane, and you're just seeing the way that the people around them have all these conspiracy theories and these thoughts, and some people are really paranoid, some people seem like they're not handling it, other people seem in denial that it even happened. And you're following them, and then you're slowly seeing the way all of these characters are connected, and how they're connected gets pretty out there and kind of silly, but it was fun. I think my favorite part of this was just the exploration of how different kinds of people would react to this sort of scenario. So basically the reaction to first contact, kinda, is the idea. And I did quite like it, and I found some of the writing and the characterization, you could say, to be pretty entertaining and probably kind of accurate to how some people would react to this. So I did think that one was a lot of fun, and I don't read a ton of sci-fi, so I can't really comment too much on the way in which the first contact was done, but I liked that little twist of they don't actually land, so then what's going to happen? And then last we have A Lady's Guide to Scandal. This is a historical romance, very cutesy romance, kind of slow build. And it's by the same author who wrote A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, which I liked much more. And that realization is kind of what kept this from actually being considered a favorite, because I just liked the other one quite a bit more. This one, you follow this young woman who, her husband dies, and she is given a lot of money from when he passes away. So now she finds herself to be this very wealthy woman. However, there's a morality clause that says if she does anything that is basically improper, that her money can be taken away, her fortune can be taken away. And so as a result, she's always been very proper and very perfect. And she's trying to continue this, but she's always been this. She's always been this person for her family, for society, for the status, for the security. And at some point, she just wants to live. She just wants to paint. She wants to be able to live where she wants to live. She wants to be able to spend time with who she wants to spend time with. And she doesn't want to feel as though she's going to lose everything just because she's pursuing something for herself for once. And I did like that exploration of her character quite a bit. I liked following a character who seems determined to finally break out of the way in which she's kind of been forced into a mold. And I did enjoy that. I did find it to be sometimes a little repetitive with the fact that she would so often fall back into, oh, I guess I have to do this, or I have to behave this way, or I can't speak on behalf of myself. And you're like, yes, you can. And one complaint, I guess you could say, I have is with these sorts of stories, they're meant to be happy and sweet, which isn't to say they don't have serious moments. It's just that the end goal is not to be devastating. But the frustration is that obviously this is a different time period, and the weight of how people's lives, they really don't have a lot of freedom of choice, especially women in this time. And there are really bad effects to behaving a certain way. And I feel like that fear for the character would be better realized in the story if maybe there was a little bit more emphasis on everything she could lose, because it's very much like she could lose her whole fortune. I mean, she'd still be fine because she'd still get some money out of all of it, but like she wouldn't be as rich. And you're like, I mean, okay, so it's not that big of a deal, because then in my head I'm just like, well, then just go ahead and do whatever you want, because at some point she kind of recognizes like, I would probably be all right. I'd be able to get by if I didn't have my fortune. I'm like, then do what you want with your life, which isn't fair because I'm like imposing my modern privileges onto this fictional character in a different time where they had way more restrictions. My point, though, is just that she recognizes that she'll be okay because she'll still have some financial security. So I'm not trying to say, like, I wish she had none because then the stakes would have been higher, but more just that she would constantly kind of be a dum-dum about certain things where I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it's just like, I just needed her to think sometimes a little bit like, hey, just, process this, talk to the side character that's her cousin and basically her best friend. I really liked that character because that character was constantly kind of talking sense into her, but I'm like, just go talk to her for a sec and then recognize like, hey, don't let this cycle continue constantly. And I know it's so hard to break out of those things, but there would be times where she would, and then this other person would come along and she'd be like, oh, huh. And then she would just fall right back into her habits, and you're like, ah. So she sometimes just frustrated me, is what I'm trying to say. And I am expressing that by grunting at you. But I guess I feel it could have been more realized, the weight of all the pressure that is on her to behave a certain way. And it's not that it wasn't at all, it just, I think, could have been a little stronger. But I still had fun with it. I still thought it was cute, and I still got from it what I was hoping for, which was this kind of like light, fun, cute story in this historical time. If at some point I said historical fantasy, I meant historical fiction. I apologize if I misspoke at any point. But the love story also was kind of cute, but it was fine. I definitely liked the couple in the other book that this author wrote quite a bit more. I just felt like they had a lot more chemistry, and the restrictions on the character I thought were better shown in that other book. But anyway, still had fun with it, still thought it was cute. That's it though for some books that I really, really liked this quarter, and then some that I enjoyed but maybe weren't favorites. I'm curious what books you've picked up this last quarter. What are some things that you've really, really loved? And if you are interested in looking at some new fantasy or my best of for previous quarters, I'll have those linked. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day though, and I'll see you later. Bye.